Okay, so today we're going to have a look at using MySQL SQL. And in our previous lesson, we actually talked about MySQL database, or we made some introduction on what MySQL database is. So we were actually able to define what MySQL database is, and also to define what a database is, because we actually saw different types of databases out there and what makes MySQL database stand out. We also looked at which category of databases does MySQL falls into. So we actually talked about different types of MySQL, and different types of databases. And the first one, if you remember, we talked about the hierarchical type of database. We talked about network type of database. We talked about relational database. We also talked about object relational databases. So in this part, the relational database is actually a category of types of database whose MySQL is one of the example. So remember, we talked about MySQL database, we talked about Microsoft SQL Server database, we talked about Oracle database. All this actually falls into what? It actually falls under the relational databases. But there's a system behind that. So the system was actually RDBMS. RDBMS. What does that stand for? It actually stands for Relational Database Management System. Relational Database Management System. So what does that tell us? You see, it's actually like a management system, or it's a database management system. But for this particular type of system, it is actually special because it's starting with the word relational, which actually relates to a table. So it means that for any particular database that is within that particular system, their data are actually stored within a table. And that actually makes RDBMS databases more, easy to handle, and also they are more simpler than the rest of the databases. So we have special features. We also have special characteristics of why you choose relational databases over other types of databases. So for our case here, we are actually tuning ourselves to what? To relational database. And we are talking about a good example of a relational database, which is MySQL database. Now, through this particular MySQL database, or through this particular database, we have a special language to talk about. So we have a special language to talk about, and the language is called SQL. The language is called SQL. So what does SQL stands for? SQL stands for Structured Query Language. SQL or SQL stands for Structured Query Language. And I know in our previous video, coming towards the end, we talked about different types of SQL statements or different categories of SQL or SQL statements. And we talked about one of them being data manipulation language. Data manipulation language. And the keywords, or what that particular category does to the system or to the database, they are actually used to either manipulate the database in one way or the other, or even to modify the database in one way or the other. For example, some of the available keywords that falls under that particular category are, for example, select keyword, update keyword, delete keyword, and insert keyword. So you can see, for example, when we categorize them, let's say, for example, we are categorizing update, delete, and insert. Update, delete, and insert. Those three keywords under DML, or under data manipulation language, they are meant to modify the database. Modification means what? Change, making a change to the database. So when you insert a value to the database, already you are making a change to the database. When you delete a value or a record from the database table, already you are making a change to that particular database. Whenever you are doing some updates on the table or on a specific row of a specific, of a specific table, you are already making a what? Making a change. Now, that leaves us with what? Select. So select is actually used to retrieve information, just to retrieve some data values from the table. So that does not actually brings change, but it tends to retrieve only for viewing, only for display. So those are categories of keywords that falls under data manipulation language. So the keyword there is manipulation. How can you manipulate the database? So you manipulate it in two ways, either in modification or in modifying the database using some keywords, or retrieving the contents of a database using some special keywords. Now, that is number one category of SQL statements. The second category of SQL statements that we did also discuss was about data control language. So data control language are basically used to control users coming into the databases, users that are created. So it means that how extensive can a user go, or at what extent can a user go in terms of accessing the database? In this case, we are not talking about only accessing the database, we are talking about accessing the database objects, that such as tables. So when it comes to data control language, we have two keywords. One is grant and the other one is revoke. So you can either grant a right to a certain user, you can either grant a privilege to a certain user, or you can restrict. So being in control means what? You have the authorization. You can actually authorize a specific user to perform some specific tasks. And if that user misuses those rights, then you also have the full rights, or you also have the rights or the authorization to deny that particular user that right. So there we have the word revoke. So revoking means what? You are denying that particular user a right, and granting or grant, you are trying to allow a specific user to perform certain activities. So that is the second category of SQL statements. Now, the third category of SQL or SQL statements, or of structured query language statements, we have data definition language. So when we talk about data definition language, we are actually talking about how the database is to be defined. How can you define the database? You see, we define the database by either creating a database objects, either adding database objects. For this case, you're talking about either it's a table, either it's a view, whether it's a sequence, whether it's a synonym, whether it's an index. So all those are what? All those are database objects. So when it comes to handling them or using the data definition keywords, for example, we have a keyword called create. Create keyword is actually used, or is one of the most important keyword that is used to define the database. Because if you want to create any of the database objects, you're supposed to start with the keyword create. So create table, create synonym, create sequence, create view, create index, you see. So that is basically used to define the database. Another thing is the alter keyword. Alter keyword is used to modify the existing or the already established what? Or already established tables, or already created tables, or any database objects in that matter. So we also have the alter keyword. And then we also have the drop keyword, which in the sense that if you want to get rid of a database object such as a table, you'll need to use the drop. And then we also have the truncate. So we will also see what are the differences between drop and truncate. So just to highlight on that, when we talk about dropping a table, you see, when a table has some records with it, or when the table has already some values, and you want to delete the entire table plus the records, you can actually use the word or the keyword drop. So drop means what? It will get rid of the entire table plus its contents. That means plus its records. But on the other hand, we can use truncate. At some point, you might say, I want to drop the contents or to delete the contents of that table, but leaving behind the structure of that particular table intact. So how can you go about that? So with that, you can now do what? You can use the keyword truncate. So truncate means it will wipe out the contents of that particular table and leaving the table structure as intact as it was. So that is the differences between drop and truncate, and we'll come into that practically. So that brings us to the third what? Brings us to the third SQL statement. Now, the last one is about, that is the last category. It's all about transactional control languages. Now, this starts from with the keyword transactions. So when we talk about transactions, we are relating to the queries we are executing. You see, if you're given a time frame and given access to the database, if you're given like 1 hour to use the database, you will actually execute, or you will end up executing more than 100 queries. Now, with the 100 queries, you can say you want to subdivide them. Say that you can save them at some point. Let's say after every 20 minutes, you save them. After several minutes, you commit. And when you talk about commit, you are actually saving the values or the values based on the queries permanently. So you're saving them permanently. So when we talk about transactional control languages, we are talking about those keywords or those languages that can be used to impact or to bring some effects to the transactions, whether you are committing the transactions or the queries, whether you are saving, that means you're creating some save points, whether you want to undo them, that is by using the keyword rollback. So by that, those are what? Those are 4 categories of SQL statements. So here we are talking about MySQL database. So a database is like a platform where we can store our values. So here we are interested with what? SQL. We are interested with SQL just to understand how can we use SQL in where? How can we use SQL in MySQL database? I know as we advance, we will also learn about using SQL in Oracle database, using SQL in Microsoft SQL Server database, using SQL in other databases that are related, or those databases that falls under RDBMS, that is Relational Database Management System. Now, that brings us to now interacting with the actual tools. Through the installation process or the installation steps, we end up having the 2 applications. Whether you are interested in using the command line based part or using the graphical user interface part, both of them are available to you. And remember, using one of the platform does not restrict you from using another platform. And whatever changes you're making on the on the database via one of the platforms, let's say for example the command line interface, the same changes can also be visible on the other side of graphical user interface, which in essence is actually MySQL Workbench. Now let's have a look at this. So this is how it looked like. This is my SQL command line client. And for example, if you click at this point, automatically you will see that we have my SQL 8.0 command line client. And of course, for this one, it's not showing MySQL Workbench, but if you scroll it down to M, we have my SQL here. So if you expand it, now it will show you what? It will show you this. So the first one, we have my SQL, that is the command line client. And then we also have my SQL Workbench. So how do we use both of them? So the first one is what? Is my SQL command line client. And remember, during our installation process or during your installation process, you are prompted to enter a password at some point. So here, you will still be prompted to enter the password so that you can interact with the command line or you can interact with MySQL database. So I need to provide my credentials. So I will just type MySQL-0123. That was actually my password. So if I press enter, you can see that we have all this information that welcome to my SQL monitor. Your MySQL connection ID is 8. That means it is 8.0 version. Oracle is a registered trademark of Oracle Corporation, its affiliates, other names, and then blah, blah. And then here we have the prompt. Now, we are talking about the Oracle. We're talking about the Oracle here. So MySQL is actually a product of what? It's a product of Oracle. So let me just expand it a little bit. So with this, once you are your password is verified, then you are set to go. You are set to go. Now, going back to the graphical part, this is what called MySQL Workbench. It is the graphical part. So again, I'll be prompted to do what? I'll be prompted to enter the root password just to create some connections. But before you create the connections, this one, MySQL Workbench usually is a graphical user interface where you can interact with different interfaces. For example, we have this at the, on your left part, we have this sort of a fish, but it's a database. It's actually an image of a MySQL database. You click this one, it gives you different ways, like models. You click this one, it also takes you to them. So here it means what? It means that you will start from this point, that you are actually welcomed to use MySQL Workbench. And you can see that MySQL Workbench is the official graphical user interface tool for MySQL. It allows you to design, create, and browse your database schemas, work with database objects, and insert data, as well as design and run SQL queries to work with stored data. You can also migrate schemas and data over other database vendors to your what? To your MySQL database. So at least for this one, it's giving you like a whole definition of what you can do with MySQL Workbench. So for you to create a connection, we have this part. You see the way I'm hovering around, it's actually blinking. So we have the keyword like local instance MySQL 80, the root. So it means that I want to connect as root. So if I double click it, it will open a window which will prompt me to enter the root password. So my root password is MySQL-0123, and then click OK, and I will end up getting into the platform. So this is actually my environment. This is actually my environment. Now with this MySQL Workbench, I know it's a little bit welcoming, but using it, it's a little bit technical. Of course, we have like the menu bars up here. We have like the server status, the client connections, the users and privileges, the status and system variables, data export, data import, restore. You can start up or shut down the database instance. You can check the server logs, the options files, and all these things. But we are not interested with any, either on the management, the instance, and the performance now, but we will do that later. Now down here, you can see that we have the output. So it means that whatever thing you're doing here, it will be captured where? On the output. Again, we have the SQL additions. These are more additional things. And then towards the right, which is very important, if I want to create, let's say to get rid of the SQL additions here, I can just click deactivate the last batch. So if I click at it, you see it turns to black. So it means that I have good environment for me to work. Again, if I want to get rid of output here, I can click the downward and you can see it's gone. It's gone. So in this case, even again, if I want to deactivate the other part, you can see that I've actually deactivated everything. The only thing that I am remaining with is the query one. So if I want to bring it, I can bring that. I can do that. I can do that. So for now, let me just get rid of the two, and then we will interact with what? With my SQL Workbench. Now, to start with, I will actually use both sides for us to see whether they are actually working concurrently, or whatever thing that we do on the command line client is also visible on the other side of what? On the other side of MySQL Workbench. So since we've already connected to MySQL via MySQL line, command line client and via MySQL Workbench, we can now start doing all this. So for instance, we had this activity. So the topic is about MySQL SQL. So these are things that I want us to go through. One, how to create MySQL database. Secondly, how to create MySQL schema. Of course, up to now, we know the differences, and also we know that they're almost similar when you talk about what is a database, what is a schema. How do we connect to MySQL database? That means after creating the databases, and then how to create tables in MySQL database, how to insert values to a table in MySQL database, how to select or retrieve records in MySQL database, and then how to update a record in MySQL tables, and then how to delete a record in MySQL tables. Now, something else probably that I'm missing here is how do we view all the available what? Tables. How do we view all the available tables? I mean, not tables, but databases. So I will show you that before we create what? Before we come to create MySQL database. So in this case, it means that we are going to first look with what? Start with MySQL command line client. So in this case, if I can just increase just a kidogo about, yes, I've actually increased the fonts just for your visibility or for you to be in a position to view it clearly. Now, how do we view? How do we view or display all the available databases? So the first step is for you to do what? Just type the word show databases. So the word show is my SQL way of doing what? Of exploring. So if you want to check the availability of any database, if you want to check the availability of any table or any database schema, you can always use what? Show databases. So you will also realize that after creating a table, for us to see probably a certain number of tables, which tables are contained within a specific database, we can always be in a position to use what? Show. So now ensure that based on the syntax, you have to write the MySQL queries, and then ensure that at the end of it all, you must put a semicolon. So those are minute things, so the small things that can affect your query from not executing well. So the execution of your query will depend on you putting all the requirements to a query. So for my case, I have like show databases. So if I press enter, you can see that this is my SQL way of displaying what? All the available databases. For example, we have a database called information schema. We have a database called MySQL, performance schema, Sakila, Sys, and World. Now, for you just to see, I have actually typed what? Show databases with a semicolon at the end. That is my SQL command line client way. If I go back to the graphical part here and just type the same thing, show databases with a semicolon. And then here we have execute button. So it means that we are trying to execute the selected portion. So here you can just press that, and automatically it will display the same information. So that means we have the similarities. If you want to go the command line way, or if you want to go the graphical user interface way, you can achieve that by just the same running or executing the same command. Now, going to this part, Remember, a database contains or is a collection of all related database objects. For our case, is actually tables. So how can I connect to this particular table? Because for you to view the contents of a specific table or a specific database, you must connect, or you must be connected to that particular database. Let's say, for example, I want to see what is contained within the information underscore schema. And for this case, we are talking about the tables. Let's say which tables are available in information underscore schema database. So the first step is I will use the word use and then type the name of that database. So use information underscore schema. Now the connection part, for me to connect to a database, I need to use the keyword use. So this is my SQL way of connecting to a specific database. So if I press enter, you can see that the statement has changed, that the database has done what? Database changed. So it means now that if I want to check the available tables, if I want to check all the available tables under information underscore schema database, I need to write show tables and then with a semicolon at the end. That is only when you are already connected to that particular database by using the keyword use. So you ensure that you take note of this. So if you press enter, now you can see the total number of what? The total number of tables that are within what? That are within this particular database. So, and the same thing happens to these other tables. If you want to show, let's say, show databases, and you want to check probably what is within the world, you can do what? Use world. So it means that the database now has changed from information underscore schema to world. Now, if you are interested to see the tables under that, you can just type show tables. And here you can see that we have what? We have only 4 tables. We have only four tables. So in this case, how do we come up with a database? And the same thing will happen here. Here, for example, after seeing that we have information schema, I can come back here and say what? Use information underscore schema, you see? So if I execute it, yes, it is already in use. And probably something that can show you that you are actually connected or you are actually using information underscore schema. You see under here, when it comes to schemas here, you can see that we have all these schemas. So because it's a system related schema, already I have this particular tick. So if I want to display, let's say I want to see all the tables, I'll just do that and execute. So it will show me all this. It will show me all these tables. So in this case, the way you use MySQL command line client is actually the same way you can use what? You can use the graphical MySQL Workbench. So in this part, this actually brings us to what? So that is something that I never covered here, because first you need to learn how to view all the databases. So we need to use the word show databases. And secondly, you need also to use database. So if you want to connect to a database, you must use database. So how to create MySQL database? So that is the first question. And the question is creating MySQL database. Creating MySQL database. So how do we create our database? Because as long as we have all these databases here, these databases contain system related tables, but I want us to come up with our own database. So how do we come up with? So first of all, you need to say what? Create database, and then let's give it, let's have a database called continent. So create database continent. So if you press enter, then it will tell you what? Query okay, one row affected. One row affected. So it actually took 0.31 seconds to be created. Now, if you go back up here and check, you can see that after, before that, there was no table called continent. Now, let's run the same command, show databases. So if I press enter, this time round, we have a database called what? We have a database called continent. And on the other side, if you say show databases, so it should be in plural, and then execute, you can see that we have continent there. So we have database continent. Now, so how do we connect now to our database? Because the database is continent. So just use the word use database. Use database. So if you press enter, you see already I am making a mistake. Why? Because I'm not supposed to say use database, but I'm supposed to say use and then mention the database name. So I'll just use continent. So if you press enter, the database has been changed. Now let's confirm whether there's something within that particular database. So for this case, it means that after creating the database by using the create database keyword, this is the keyword, create database keyword. The create keyword is one of SQL statements. It's actually a DDL. So already we are making a change or adding a table or adding a database object into the database. So create database continent. Now, so after that, you can now connect to that particular database and it becomes what? It will tell you that the database has been changed. So it means that this particular environment now is empty. And if I need also to confirm whether there are tables there, press enter, you can see that the database is empty. So it means that it's a brand new database. It's a brand new database. So this is how you do what? You create MySQL database. The second part is creating MySQL schema. Now, in this case, we have a relationship. We have similarities between creating a database and creating a schema. Or when it comes to the actual definition of a schema of a database, they are almost what? Alike. Because when you talk about a database, for instance, you're talking about a collection of what? Related data stored in an organized manner. But when you talk about the schema, it actually gives the structure or a logical structure to the database. So how do we create a schema? So creating a schema or using the word create schema and the word create database does not matter, because at the end, you will have what? You will have a database. So let me just use create what? Let's create another. So we're using create schema and then followed by the schema name. So let me have country. Let me have this country. Let me have like, okay, what is the name of the schema that we can use? Okay, let me just use accessories. Accessories, and then press enter. You can see what? The query, okay, one row affected, one row affected. So it means that if you go to show databases, let's see what will happen. Will the schema be included? Press enter. Now you can see that the schema is included, which is similar to what? A database. The continent has also been done what? Has also been added. Now, let me bring you to this. Let's see again whether they are related. I need to use continent. That means I'm connecting to continent. Let's see the results. You see that's it's telling me what? Database changed. Now, let me use what? Use accessories. You see what? Database changed. So we can actually use different names, but we will arrive at creating the same thing, which is actually what? A database. So we don't actually worry about the way we do it, but at the end, we are arriving at the same answer. Now, again here, if I type show database and click this, you can see that we have accessories and also we have what? We have continent. We have accessories and we have continents. Yeah. So with that, this brings us to this. Okay. So connecting to my SQL database. How do we connect to my SQL database? Already we've done this. That by using what? Use continent, by using the use keyword. So the first one was to create the database. The second one was to connect that particular database by using use keyword. So you create database and then you connect that particular database. Then inside the database, you can now create tables. So in this case, let's just use only one. So use continent. So we are connecting to what? We are connecting to continent. Sorry. So what happens is, so when it comes to another part, after creating, connecting to my SQL database now, we need to do what? We need to go to the next step, which is all about creating tables in my SQL database. Creating tables in my SQL database. Now, this is a very technical area. This is a very technical area. And you have to ensure that whenever you are creating tables, you must first be connected in a database. So for my case, already I am connected to continent. And the database name should always have some relationship with the names or the tables. So here, my idea was that to create a database called continent, and then under continent, I can now create different tables or different tables related to countries, because under continent, we have country. So I want us to create a table called country. And when you are creating a table, you must consider three things. One, you must consider, because the whole picture is all about bringing the structure of that particular table. So you must consider, one, you must consider the name of a column. What will that table take as a column or within the column? And secondly, what is the data type, or what is the type of data under each column, or what is the type of data stored under each column? And then of course, we have something called the precision. So let's start by creating a table. So creating a table, I need to use the keyword create, then followed by the name table, and then the name of my table, which is what? Country. So since we have different countries, I can use the word country and then put a bracket. Put a bracket. So that is the first step. Create table country, and then press enter. So the second one, the second part, because we are not yet done with creating a table, we need to specify the columns. So the columns will differ. I may actually require, let's say, 10 columns, 2 columns, 3 columns in this particular table, but you need also to stand out with your own columns. So when it comes to the actual database, you need actually to exhaust all the columns, all the data that should be captured by that particular database. So for my case, I need to have a column called country ID. So country underscore ID. Now, why am I having underscore? I'm having an underscore just to connect or to link between country and ID, just to ensure that is a one word. But if you are not interested with underscore, probably you can have ID, country ID. So if you put that, then what is the type of data that should be captured under that column? So it is a number. So in MySQL, we use integer. int, and then comma. And then what else? Country underscore name. So we need the country name. Now the country name is a character. So you have to put something called varchar, and then you can put what? You can put even the size, that is 20. Now 20 means it is the number of characters in the country name. For example, Kenya. When you have Kenya, you'll find out that, let's say you type Kenya. It means that the character here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it means that the word Kenya or the name Kenya has 5 characters. So if you give it 20 here, which is actually the maximum, it means that Kenya would be captured because it has a less number of characters compared to the maximum precision or the maximum size given. So just give it varchar. And then the last one, let's say I need to have what? Population size of that particular country. So this one is going to be a number. And then you close it. If that is going to be your last column, you just close it and then give it a semicolon. So this is how we specify what? The column name, the data type. So if the column is going to take in a number, just give it integer. If it is going to take in a text value or a character, then give it varchar. Then the population size, we know it's a number, we can give it int. And you are done creating your table. So if I press enter, it will tell me what? Query okay. Now, for me to describe this particular table, I need to use the word describe. Whether you use describe in full or you use desk. So if you go back to describe and then describe the country table, now you can see how it looks like. So all the columns mentioned up here, country ID, country name, population size, all of them are captured as field. All of them are captured as field. So this is how you do it. This is how we come up with a table. So if you want to create another one, it says student table. You can have student, create table student into bracket. Let's say I want student ID. I'm putting int, comma, because it will take in students' admission numbers. I need first underscore name. That is a name, which is a character. Let me give it 20. Let's say last underscore name is a varchar. So let me give it 20. Let's say marks for that particular student. Let's give it in terms of numbers. And then let's say we need also another column called gender. So this one is a varchar because we will be giving it as male, female. Let's give it 10. And then if that is the end, then add another bracket and then the semicolon. Press enter, the table is created. So if you want to come back and say describe student, just to see, you can see now the table student has been created. The table student has been created. So this is how you come up with different tables as far as MySQL is concerned. Now, so when it comes to that, this is about creating tables in MySQL, but we will still discuss it more in depth. How do we insert values in MySQL tables? How do we insert values in MySQL table? So in this case, we will concentrate with the one that has less, let's say country. So I want us to work with what? With country. So we are actually storing what? We want to store some values about the country ID, the country name, and the population size. So we need to insert some values. So how do we insert? To insert some values into a table, you have to start with the word insert into. So you have to take care of what? The keywords. Insert into. Then where are you inserting? You are inserting into a table called what? Country. And then what values? So you put the word values. So you see here, we are starting with the country ID, which means is a what? Is a number. So let me put it 254, that is for Kenya. Followed by what? country name. So country name, because it's a character, it has some special features. We don't actually write Kenya alone, no. We must put the single quotation like Kenya. A single quotation like Kenya, and then another comma. Then the last one is what? The population size. So here we can have, let's say 40 million people. So here we have the first value is in line with the country ID. The second value is in line with the country name. And the third value is in line with population size. So now if I press enter, it will tell me query, okay, one row affected, one row affected. So how do I display? How do I view? So if I want to display, I will just use the word select star from select star from country. Select star from country. So it means that I want to confirm whether I have successfully inserted values. So select space star space from space country. Star means what? All. Star means all. So if you press enter, now you can see that we have 254 in line with the country ID, country name, and then population size. So if I want to insert others, I can just come here and change this. Let's say 3. Here I can put, let's say Tanzania, because it's a country name. And then let's say its country code is 255. Press enter. Go back and check it. Press enter. You can see now that I have inserted, or I have successfully inserted two rows. So that is how to insert. You must consider how the columns are arranged. So this is about inserting values in MySQL, and you can pause it so that you can have look at it clearly. Then selecting record values in MySQL table. I've just done that by using select keyword, and then update record values in MySQL table. How do I update? How can I update values? So for example, if I want to update, let's say, for example, I've just done a mistake of putting 40 million instead of 80 million. How can I update this particular row whose country ID is 254? So if you want to update, you can just use this keyword, update. This time around, we're not talking about update table. We are just doing it directly. Update country. Then press enter. Then say set. What are we setting? Remember, this is the area we are trying to adjust. So set population and write the way it is. Population size equals to, so we put it 80 million. Yeah, something like that. So set 80 million. And then where, now country ID, we need to tell the system which area or which row are we updating, where country ID equals to 254. So we must make a reference of this. So if you press enter, okay, I think there's a problem there. Country, okay, yeah. You see something else that I've done a mistake here. So country underscore ID, and we do have what? Country ID. So ensure that you should be very careful when it comes to that. So everything is okay there, but here I need to get rid of that and put where country ID equals to 254. If I press enter, you can see that the query, okay, one row affected. So if you come back and confirm it, I'm using up down arrow key. So if you come up and select all the records just to see whether a change has been made, you just use the keyword select star from country. Now you can see that the value has been changed to 80 million. That is how you do what? That is how you update. So that is the only way you can do the update. So we will still immerse ourselves so much on this, but just take a pause, look at what I've done, and you are in a better position now to work with. For example, if you want to change, let's say, for example, you've actually done a mistake. Probably it's not Kenya, it is Zambia. How can you update? So this is how you do. So I'll just say update country, press enter, set. So you need to type the way it is. Country name equals to, because it is a character, you need to put what? A single quotation. Then say where country ID equals to 254. Press enter. You see? So here you can actually decide to set or change country ID, to change country name, to change population size. So ensure that you have a reference. So the last line will connect you to a reference number or reference point. So at this point, you can have where country ID, where country name, where population size, as long as you are setting that particular column. So if you want to check whether we've changed it, now you can see Zambia has been updated. So that is how you can update. And then the last part is to delete record or records values in MySQL database. So how do we do that? So to delete a specific record, we must work with the ID. Remember, this is the unique identifier. 254 is connected to Zambia and no other country. 255 is connected to Tanzania. So if you want to delete, you just use the word delete from country, where country underscore ID, country underscore ID equals to 254. That is how you delete a row, a record. Delete from country, where country ID equals to 254. If you press enter, it will tell you query okay. And if you want to confirm, you can still go back and say select star from country. Now you can see we are only remaining with what? One row. So the 254 is already gone. So if you want to delete now the 255, you can still recall this and have 5 there. Delete from country, where country ID equals to 255. So if you press enter, query okay, and now when you come to select star from country, press enter, it is empty now, it is empty. So all these are processes, or all these are steps of doing what? All these are steps of introducing again MySQL to you, and just to know a specific or the specific language used, which is SQL or structured query language. So far what we've learned is we've actually learned how to display the total number of databases that are there, how to connect to the database, how to create database, how to create a schema, how to create tables in that particular databases once it's connected, how do we insert some values in your table, how do we view tables, how do we delete, how do we update, and how do we select. So this actually brings us to the end of this particular tutorial, and I will see you next time. So bye-bye and see you next time.